The bus rolled down a long, dusty Kansas road, the windows rattling with every bump. The sun burned low over endless wheat fields, painting everything gold, the barns, the mailboxes, the people waving goodbye. Sitting near the back, Eleanor Ellie Ward pressed her forehead to the window and tried to swallow the lump in her throat. She wasn't crying, not yet, but her reflection in the glass, pale, serious, and barely 20, didn't look like someone ready for war. When the bus stopped at the depot, the recruiter barked orders, handing out khaki uniforms that smelled of starch and dust. Ellie accepted hers with both hands, like it was something sacred. Around her, young men joked and shoved each other, laughing too loud, hiding their fear behind swagger. One of them glanced at her and smirked. "Missy, you sure you're in the right place?" "The nurses' camp's that way," he said, pointing down the road. Ellie forced a smile. "I can read the sign, thank you." It was 1944. The world was tearing itself apart, and America was throwing everything it had into the fire. Ellie had grown up hearing about war, her father's stories from the trenches of the Great War. He used to tell her, "A rifle's only as steady as the heart behind it." He'd taught her to shoot when she was 12, using tin cans lined up on fence posts. Back then, it had been a game. Now, that same steady hand would carry a field kit instead of a gun. She had signed up as a medic, one of the few women accepted in the field. Her mother had begged her not to go. "Ellie, please. You don't belong over there," she'd cried, clutching her daughter's hands so tight they'd gone white. But Ellie had only whispered, "If I don't belong there, who does?" The first few weeks of training were brutal. The instructors didn't care that she was smaller, or that her hands shook when she carried heavy stretchers. "You want equality?" one of them shouted. "Then earn it." She did. Every push-up, every long march, every sleepless night. She learned to run toward screams, not away. At night, when others collapsed on their bunks, Ellie would sit by the oil lamp, mending torn bandages and writing letters to her mother she never sent. She didn't know how to explain why she was there, only that she needed to be. The war wasn't just about men fighting men. It was about what people became when everything was stripped away, and she wanted to find out who she was underneath it all. The other recruits called her Dollface. Some meant it kindly, most didn't. When rations came around, they'd hand her the lightest pack. "Wouldn't want you to break a nail," they'd laugh. She learned to take it silently, though every word burned. She promised herself she'd earn their respect, not by shouting, not by arguing, but by outlasting them all. One evening, during weapons maintenance drills, a corporal noticed her lingering near the firing range. "You can shoot?" he asked, half smirking. Ellie shrugged. "A little. My father taught me." He tossed her a rifle, more as a joke than anything. "Then let's see what Kansas can do." She lifted the weapon, heavy and cold, and felt a familiar calm spread through her. She lined up the sights, breathed out, and fired. The tin target, smaller than her palm, spun off the post. Then another, and another. The corporal blinked. "Well, I'll be damned." She handed the rifle back gently. "Guess Kansas ain't all corn and cows," she said. The men didn't laugh that time. Weeks turned to months. Then one day, her name appeared on the deployment list, Northern France. She was going to the front. Her stomach dropped when she read it, but she didn't flinch. This was what she'd trained for. That night, she sat alone under the stars, reading the letter her mother had sent. "Dear Ellie, your father would have been proud. But promise me something. When you hear the guns, don't forget who you are. You're not just a soldier. You're my daughter. Come home." She folded the letter neatly and tucked it inside her uniform pocket, close to her heart. The transport ship was crowded and cold. The ocean seemed endless, the horizon always gray. Men sang songs to hide their fear. Ellie just listened. She stared out at the waves and wondered how many soldiers before her had crossed these same waters, chasing duty and survival. When they landed in France, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of burned metal. The ground was scarred with craters and wire. Trucks roared past, filled with wounded men screaming for help. It was nothing like the training camp. She looked around, trying to steady her breath. The sergeant shouted over the chaos, "Medics to the tents! Get ready for casualties." Ellie grabbed her bag and ran. Inside the medical tent, the world blurred into a frenzy of blood, shouts, and prayer. Men with missing limbs. Men who wouldn't stop bleeding. Men calling for their mothers. Ellie's gloves were red within minutes. She worked until her arms felt numb. There was no time to think, no time to cry. Just stop the bleeding. Stop the dying. Hours later, when the shelling paused, she stumbled outside for air. The night was quiet, except for distant gunfire. She looked up at the stars again, the same ones from Kansas. For a moment, she imagined the smell of wheat fields, her mother humming in the kitchen, her father laughing by the fire. Then a voice behind her broke the spell. "Ward, you did good today." It was the corporal, the same one from training. His face was tired but kind. She nodded, too exhausted to speak. He hesitated, then said, "Some of the boys were saying you shouldn't be here. I told them they were wrong." Ellie smiled faintly. "They'll figure it out eventually." He laughed. "Yeah, maybe when you save their hides." That night, as she lay on her cot, sleep wouldn't come. She listened to the wind against the tent and the far-off thunder of artillery. Her fingers ached. Her heart did too. She pulled out her mother's letter again, smoothing the creases, and whispered, "I'll come home. I promise." But deep down, she wasn't sure she believed it. Somewhere outside, a flare lit up the horizon, bright as day for a split second, and then darkness swallowed it again. Ellie turned on her side, eyes open. Tomorrow would bring more wounded, more chaos, more chances to prove herself. And she would be ready. Because no matter how many times they told her she didn't belong, she knew one thing for sure. Courage doesn't wear a uniform. It just refuses to give up. The war hadn't seen her yet. But it soon would. The morning air hung heavy with the smell of oil, damp earth, and something sharp, fear. Dawn crept over the French countryside, painting the shattered trees and broken fences in dull gray light. Ellie Ward tightened the straps on her medic's satchel and checked her supplies. Bandages, morphine, a roll of gauze, scissors, and trembling hands that she willed to stay steady. "Move out." Sergeant Mills barked, his voice cutting through the mist. The men shuffled into line, their boots crunching frost. Ellie fell in behind them, her heart hammering. She wasn't supposed to be near the front, but the medic team had been split after last night's bombing. "You stick with us," Mills had told her, not unkindly. "We'll need you." The field ahead was quiet, eerily so. A kind of silence that hummed before storms. Somewhere out there, beyond the trees, the enemy waited. They moved in staggered formation, rifles raised, scanning the horizon. Ellie's eyes darted between them, searching for movement. Her breath came in clouds. She could hear her pulse pounding in her ears. Then, all at once, the world exploded. A shell whistled overhead and detonated behind them, the blast lifting Ellie off her feet. Dirt and smoke swallowed the sky. She hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision blurred. When she pushed herself up, screams filled the air. "Medic! Medic!" Someone shouted. Ellie stumbled forward through the chaos. A young private lay on the ground, clutching his leg, or what was left of it. Blood soaked the soil. Without thinking, she tore open her satchel and wrapped a tourniquet above the wound. The boy's face was ghost white, his lips trembling. "You're gonna be all right," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Bullets tore through the grass nearby, snapping twigs, kicking up dirt. The men fired back blindly, shouting orders no one could hear. Ellie stayed low, dragging the wounded private toward a ditch. Her arms burned, her lungs screamed. "Keep your head down," Sergeant Mills bellowed, firing over her shoulder. When she finally got the boy to cover, she looked up and saw the line collapsing. The unit was pinned, the enemy advancing fast. Ellie wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her, too, but the sight of the wounded sprawled across the field froze her in place. She couldn't leave them. Not after coming this far. "Ward!" Mills shouted again. "Stay put." "That's an order." But she didn't. Ellie sprinted across open ground, diving between craters, dragging whoever she could reach. Every second felt like a lifetime, bullets slicing the air, explosions throwing hot shrapnel into the dirt. She barely noticed when her sleeve caught fire. She smothered it with her bare hand and kept moving. By midday, the air was thick with smoke and cries. The medics were down to 3, and Ellie was the only one still standing. Her uniform was shredded, her face streaked with grime, yet her eyes burned with focus. She crawled to a wounded corporal gasping for breath. A chest wound, too deep. She pressed her hand over it, blood seeping through her fingers. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Stay with me, please." The man's eyes fluttered. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Neither should you," she said softly. He smiled faintly, then went still. For a heartbeat, everything around her blurred. The noise, the smoke, the shouting. The only thing she could hear was her own breath, ragged and uneven. Then another explosion snapped her back to reality. She turned and saw a jeep overturned, flames licking at the tires. A man was trapped underneath, screaming. Ellie ran. She didn't stop to think, didn't stop to breathe. She grabbed a metal bar and wedged it under the frame, heaving with all her strength. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her boots slipped in the mud, but the jeep shifted just enough for the soldier to crawl free. He stared at her in disbelief. "How the hell did you?" "Don't thank me," she cut him off, dragging him toward cover as another round of shells exploded nearby. By dusk, what remained of her unit huddled behind a low ridge. The ground trembled with every distant blast. The once orderly company was now a handful of broken, bloodied survivors. Ellie crouched beside a soldier whose arm had been shredded by shrapnel. Her hands worked on autopilot, wrapping, stitching, tying. Her supplies were running out. Her mind raced. She'd done everything she could, but it wasn't enough. "Ward," Mills said, his voice hoarse. He crouched beside her, eyes red from smoke. "You saved more men today than any of us could have hoped. You did good." Ellie didn't look up. "They're still dying. That's war." "No," she whispered. "That's hell." For the first time, Mills didn't argue. The sun dipped below the trees, setting the horizon ablaze with orange light. The gunfire had slowed, replaced by an eerie quiet. Somewhere in that silence, Ellie felt the world shift. The fear that had followed her since Kansas, the doubt, the voices telling her she didn't belong, started to fade. She had seen what war truly was. Not the glory in posters or the pride of uniforms. It was chaos, pain, sacrifice, and somehow, in that madness, she had found herself, not as a soldier or a woman, but as something simpler, someone who refused to look away. That night, rain began to fall, cold and relentless. The survivors huddled under scraps of canvas, shivering, too tired to talk. Ellie sat apart, cleaning her tools under the dim light of a flickering lantern. Her hands were raw and swollen. A voice came from the dark, the same private whose leg she'd saved earlier. "Ma'am?" he croaked. Ellie turned. "Don't call me ma'am. It's Ellie." He smiled weakly. "Ellie, then. You really saved me." She looked at him, pale, feverish, barely alive, and forced a smile. "You saved yourself. I just tied the knot." He chuckled, but it turned into a cough. "The guys said you're crazy. Running into fire like that." "Maybe," she said. "But if being crazy keeps someone breathing, I'll take it." The boy nodded slowly, drifting back to sleep. Ellie sat there long after, staring into the rain. Around her, the battlefield was quiet, too quiet. The dead lay where they fell, waiting for morning burial. She could hear the faint hum of distant engines, the world still moving, despite all the loss. She pulled her coat tighter and whispered to herself, "You wanted to prove you belonged. You did, but at what cost?" Her father's voice echoed in her mind, calm and distant. "Courage isn't about being fearless, Ellie. It's about staying when everyone else runs." And she had stayed. As the rain turned to mist and the horizon began to pale with morning light, Ellie finally closed her eyes. She'd faced her first day of real combat, her baptism by fire, and come out alive. But deep down, she knew survival was only the beginning. Tomorrow, the war would test her again. And she wasn't sure how many pieces of herself she had left to give. Dawn came gray and wet. The rain hadn't stopped all night, and the camp looked more like a swamp than a base. Tents sagged under the weight of water, and the mud swallowed boots with a slurp at every step. Ellie Ward moved between the rows of wounded men, changing bandages and checking pulses. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but her hands still worked with quiet precision. "Ward," Sergeant Mills called, trudging through the muck. "Command wants us moving again. We're heading east." "You're coming." She wiped her hands on her coat. "East?" "We barely held this line." "Orders," he said, the word carrying more exhaustion than authority. "Pack light." Ellie looked at the tent full of men too broken to move, and felt her stomach knot. War didn't wait for anyone. By noon they were on the road again, what was left of them. The convoy crept through shattered villages, where stone walls still smoked, and church bells lay in the rubble. Dogs barked at the trucks. Old women stared from doorways, hollow-eyed. By afternoon, the rumble of artillery returned, closer each minute. The convoy halted in a small valley ringed with forest. Mills barked, "Dig in. We hold here till reinforcements catch up." The soldiers grabbed shovels and rifles. Ellie joined them, throwing mud aside until her fingers blistered. When the trenches were ready, she distributed morphine and extra bandages, then crouched beside the men, waiting. The shelling started before sunset. The first blast hit the supply truck, scattering debris across the valley. Ellie ducked, hands over her head. "Incoming!" Someone screamed. More explosions followed, tearing through trees, raining splinters and fire. "Ward, get the wounded to cover," Mills shouted. She ran, half crawling, dragging a bleeding private into a crater. The man groaned, clutching his side. Ellie pressed down hard, feeling the warm rush of blood between her fingers. Another blast shook the ground, and the sky turned orange. When the noise finally eased, the valley was a mess of smoke and twisted metal. Half the rifles were gone, buried or broken. The survivors staggered through the haze, coughing. Ellie moved from one to another, tying makeshift bandages, ignoring the ringing in her ears. Then she heard a sharp crack of gunfire from the ridge above. Enemy scouts had slipped through. The men scrambled for weapons, but most had none left. "Where's the ammo crate?" Mills bellowed. "Gone, sir." Trucks hit. Mills cursed. "We've got 10 rifles working at best." He turned toward Ellie. "Ward, stay down." Before she could answer, a soldier nearby tossed something her way. "Catch." Instinctively, she reached out and grabbed at a rifle, slick with mud, the barrel brown with rust. "I'm a medic," she shouted. "Not today." The man yelled before sprinting toward another trench. Ellie looked down at the weapon. It was old, a Springfield from the last war. The bolt was stiff. The trigger squeaked. A relic barely held together. Around her, bullets chewed up the dirt. She ducked behind a log, heart pounding. She'd fired guns before, clean, well-oiled hunting rifles. Her father kept locked in a chest, but never one like this. She tried to work the bolt. It jammed halfway. Cursing softly, she pulled out her field knife and pried the mechanism open. The rifle smelled of rust and old oil. She scraped until the metal clicked back into place. The first round slid in with a reluctant clack. Above the ridge, enemy soldiers moved through the smoke, silhouettes against the burning tree line. Mills shouted for covering fire, but only 2 rifles answered. The rest were useless. Ellie's hands shook. She remembered her father's voice again, steady, calm. "Breathe out before you pull the trigger. Don't fight the shot. Guide it." She steadied the rifle on the log, lined up the sights, and exhaled. Crack! The shot startled even her. One of the enemy silhouettes dropped. She blinked, hardly believing it. The soldiers beside her froze. Who the hell fired that? Mills barked. Ellie didn't answer. She chambered another round. Crack! A second figure fell. The ridge erupted with return fire, bullets whining past her head. She ducked, mud splashing her face, then rose again, just enough to aim. Her heartbeat slowed. The world narrowed to the rifle's iron sights. One breath, one squeeze. Another shot found its mark. Within seconds, 3 enemy gunners were down. The rest scattered for cover. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered. That was the medic. Mills stared at her from across the trench, eyes wide. "Ward, what to keep going?" She did. Every round that left the barrel felt like thunder in her bones. The rusty rifle kicked hard, bruising her shoulder, but she ignored the pain. The metal burned against her skin. Smoke curled from the muzzle. The bolt stuck again and again, and she forced it loose each time. The last enemy soldier tried to run. Ellie tracked him calmly, squeezed the trigger, and the rifle clicked empty. For a heartbeat she froze, then dropped behind the trench as a final burst of gunfire tore overhead. When it stopped, the valley was silent, except for the crackle of burning wood. Slowly, she rose. The enemy was gone. The men around her stared as if they'd seen a ghost. Mud streaked her face, hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes sharp and distant. She looked down at the rifle in her hand, smoking, battered, still warm. Mills climbed out of the trench and limped toward her. "You cleared the ridge," he said quietly. "You by yourself." Ellie swallowed hard. Her hands were trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. I just did what I had to." He gave a short laugh, half disbelief, half awe. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." A few soldiers cheered weakly. Others just stared at her, unsure what to make of what they'd witnessed, a medic who'd fought like a sniper, with a gun that shouldn't have worked. Ellie set the rifle down on a rock, its rust glinting in the firelight. Her shoulder ached. Her fingers were blistered from the bolt. The cheering felt distant, unreal. She knelt beside the wounded again, letting the weapon rest at her side. As she bandaged a soldier's arm, he whispered, "You saved us." All of us. She didn't look up. No, she said softly. I just bought us time. Night fell heavy and cold. The surviving men gathered around small fires, their faces ghostly in the flickering light. Someone began cleaning weapons. Others muttered prayers. Ellie sat apart, staring at the rifle beside her boots. Rain hissed on the coals. She picked up the weapon again and ran a cloth along the barrel. Despite its damage, it gleamed faintly under the moon. Mills approached, crouched beside her. You ever tell me where you learned to shoot like that? My father, she said, not taking her eyes off the rifle. He taught me before the first war ended. Said a gun's only as good as the hands behind it. Well, Mills said, tonight those hands saved 30 men. Ellie gave a tired smile. Let's hope they can do it again. He nodded and walked away. When he was gone, she whispered to herself, You shouldn't be here, Ellie Ward, but here you are. The rain hid the tears that finally came. Above the valley, the clouds parted for a moment, revealing a slice of moonlight that glinted off the rifle's rusted metal. It looked almost new in that pale glow reborn by fire and will. Ellie laid it beside her bedroll before closing her eyes. Tomorrow, it would jam again. Tomorrow, it might save her life. For now, it was just a weapon and a reminder that sometimes, in the heart of war, the broken things were the ones that endured. The morning after the valley battle arrived with a strange quiet. No shelling. No gunfire. Only the sigh of wind through the blackened trees. For the first time in days, Ellie Ward could hear her own thoughts, and that was almost worse than the noise. She sat beside the smoldering remains of a campfire, polishing the same rusty rifle that had saved them all. The once brown barrel now gleamed faintly, cleaned by her careful hands. Every dent, every patch of corrosion told a story. She couldn't explain why she felt connected to it. Maybe because, like her, it wasn't supposed to survive. Sergeant Mills trudged over, his limp more pronounced in the cold. We got word from command, he said, lowering himself beside her. They want a report. They heard what you did yesterday. Ellie didn't look up. What I did was get lucky. Mills snorted. You cleared an entire ridge with a museum piece. That's not luck. That's something else. She shook her head. I'm a medic, not a soldier. Doesn't matter. Out here, everyone fights. Some just fight better than others. He tossed her a can of coffee. It was cold and bitter, but it steadied her hands. Around them, soldiers repaired rifles, dug new trenches, and buried the dead. The valley still smelled of smoke and wet earth. A sense of unease hung in the air, like the pause before another storm. By midday, a messenger jeep arrived, splattered with mud. A young lieutenant stepped out, crisp uniform in stark contrast to the filth around him. He scanned the scene until his eyes landed on Ellie. Your ward? He asked. Yes, sir. You're being reassigned. Command's orders. Mills frowned. Reassigned? She's my medic. Not anymore, the lieutenant said, handing him a sealed envelope. Effective immediately. Ellie read the letter. Her stomach tightened. It wasn't a transfer to another medical unit. It was an attachment to the 6th Recon Division, a forward sniper detail. This must be a mistake, she said. I'm not a sniper. The lieutenant smirked. Funny, ma'am. That's not what the reports say. They want you in the field, today. She turned to Mills. His face was unreadable. You don't have to go, he said quietly, though they both knew she did. Ellie nodded. I'll go. The 6th Recon Division operated deep in contested territory. Small teams, 3 or 4 soldiers at most, moved silently through forests, setting up observation posts, identifying enemy movements, and striking when needed. It was the kind of assignment that chewed people up and left no names behind. When Ellie arrived at their camp, the men looked her over skeptically. A woman and a medic, carrying a relic rifle. They didn't know what to make of her. Their captain, a tall man named Rain, approached with arms crossed. "You're the girl who took out a ridge with that antique?" he asked. "I just aimed where I had to," Ellie said. Rain smirked. "We'll see." That night, the squad moved out. Their mission was to locate an enemy artillery nest suspected of shelling Allied positions near the eastern ridge. The forest was dense, the air heavy with mist. Every step crunched faintly underfoot. Ellie kept the rifle slung across her shoulder, hands resting lightly on the worn stock. They stopped before dawn on a high ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Through her field glasses, Ellie spotted movement below 4 artillery pieces hidden beneath camouflaged nets. Soldiers moved like shadows around them, preparing for another barrage. Rain whispered, "We call in coordinates, and we're done." Quiet job. But before he could radio, the enemy began firing straight toward the valley where Ellie's old unit was dug in. The shells arced through the sky like streaks of fire. Her chest clenched. Those men Mills, the wounded she'd left behind, they were down there. She grabbed Rain's arm. "We can't just watch. Orders are to observe," he hissed. "We're not equipped to engage. Then I will." She lay flat, propping the rifle on a rock. The weapon's metal was cold against her cheek. Through the scope a cracked, clouded lens from another era, she found the first gunner. Her breath steadied, heart slowing. The world went still. Crack, the gunner fell. The artillery fire stuttered, momentarily confused. Before they could react, she chambered another round and fired again. A second man dropped. Rain cursed, ducking beside her. "Damn it, Ward! You'll give away our position." "Too late," she murmured, sighting in the next target. Crack! Another shot, another soldier down. By now, chaos had erupted below. Enemy soldiers scattered, shouting orders. One turned their way, raising binoculars. Ellie didn't hesitate. Crack! The lenses shattered in his hands. "Get the coordinates now," she barked. Rain finally called it in. Minutes later, Allied artillery answered shells whistling overhead, smashing into the enemy position. The ground trembled as explosions tore through the valley. The entire ridge glowed with orange fire. When the dust settled, the guns were silent. Ellie lowered her rifle, smoke curling from the barrel. Rain stared at her, mouth half open. "You just saved 300 men." She didn't reply. She couldn't. Her hands were shaking again, not from fear, but from the weight of what she'd done. She wasn't just patching wounds anymore. She was creating them. They returned to camp before nightfall. Word of her shot spread faster than any report. Soldiers whispered her name like a legend, the medic with the rusty rifle who'd silenced an entire artillery unit. Some called her Red, for the streak of blood that had marked her cheek that day. Others called her the Ghost of the Valley. Ellie hated both names. She wanted to forget the sound of those explosions, the look in the men's eyes before they fell. But sleep didn't come. When she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the wounded she couldn't save, and now the faces of the enemies she'd killed. The next morning, Captain Rain handed her a new rifle, a sleek, factory-finished Springfield with a scope that actually worked. "You've earned this," he said. She looked at it for a long moment, then pushed it back toward him. "I'll keep mine." He frowned. "That thing's barely functional. It works when it matters." He gave a small nod of respect. "Suit yourself." Weeks passed. The war shifted eastward, and Ellie's legend grew. She moved silently through fields and ruins, her shots precise and unrelenting. She became the unseen guardian of her unit, always appearing where the line was weakest, always turning the tide. Her rusty rifle never jammed again, as if it too had found purpose in her hands. Yet with each victory came a heavier silence. The men she saved cheered her name, but she couldn't bring herself to join them. She wasn't proud. She was surviving, nothing more. One night, as the stars burned faintly above the shattered forest, Sergeant Mills appeared again. His unit had caught up with hers, battered but alive. "I heard the stories," he said, sitting beside her. "Didn't believe them until now." "Believe what you want," Ellie said softly, staring at the rifle across her knees. "It's all the same." He followed her gaze. "You could have walked away, but you didn't. I guess some people are meant to stay in the fight." He nodded, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Then let's make sure the fight's worth it." For the first time in weeks, Ellie smiled a small, weary smile. The war wasn't over, but neither was she. Somewhere out there, another battle waited, another field to cross. And when it came, she'd be ready. Because the first shot she ever fired wasn't just a moment of desperation. It was the beginning of something far greater. A spark that would echo across the lines, across history, and remind the world that even the rusted and forgotten could shine when the time came. By the time autumn rolled through the front lines, the forests were stripped bare, and the air carried the faint scent of frost and gunpowder. The war had quieted in this sector, not because peace had come, but because one woman's shadow haunted the ridges. They called her the ghost of the valley. Rumors spread faster than orders. A lone medic who carried a rusted rifle and struck with deadly precision. A figure who appeared in the smoke, fired once, and vanished. Soldiers whispered her name around campfires as both comfort and warning. To the Allies, she was hope. To the enemy, she was a curse. Ellie Ward never wanted any of it. She sat alone by a small fire that barely held against the cold. Her rifle lay across her lap, metal darkened by oil and age. Each night she cleaned it, emotions automatic, ritualistic. Every scrape of the cloth was a prayer, or maybe a confession. She no longer knew the difference. Captain Rain approached quietly, his boots crunching in the frost. "You're famous, you know," he said. "Even the brass knows your name now." Ellie didn't look up. Fame doesn't win wars. It just paints a target. "Maybe," he said, crouching beside her. "But people fight harder when they think the ghost is watching." She gave a tired half-smile. "Let's hope the ghost doesn't miss." He studied her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the pale scar running along her temple. She looked older than her 24 years, worn by sleepless nights and too many memories. "You should get some rest," he said softly. "We move again at dawn." She nodded but didn't move. Rest was a luxury she'd forgotten how to take. The next morning, the 6th Recon Division was tasked with scouting a rail junction 20 miles east, a key supply route the enemy used to move ammunition. Destroying it would cripple their push toward the capital. They left before sunrise, 6 soldiers moving through the mist-shrouded woods. Ellie walked near the rear, her eyes scanning the tree line, finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. Every sound, a snapping twig, a distant crow, made her heart quicken. The enemy had scouts everywhere. Hours passed in tense silence until they reached a ridge overlooking the valley below. Through her scope, Ellie saw the junction. Trains, fuel depots, and at least 50 enemy soldiers guarding the site. Her breath caught. This wasn't a scouting mission. It was suicide. Rain set down his binoculars. "We can't hit that with 6 people." "We could call in artillery," suggested Private Lang. Rain shook his head. "Communications are down. We're too deep in." Ellie lowered her rifle. "Then we make them think the army's already here." The men turned toward her. You mean a bluff? She nodded. They know the ghost is out here. Let's make them believe she brought an army. Rain's eyes narrowed, considering. You're serious? I've never been more. As dusk fell, the squad spread out along the ridge. Ellie took position in the center, her rifle resting on a sandbag, the rusty barrel aimed at the heart of the camp. Below, enemy soldiers gathered near their fires, unaware of the eyes watching them. She steadied her breath, remembering her father's words again. Don't rush your shot. Let the world fall quiet, then move. The world fell quiet. Crack! The first shot struck a fuel drum. Flames erupted, spreading fast through the depot. Shouts echoed up the valley. Soldiers scrambled for cover. Before they could react, Lang and the others opened fire from different angles, spacing their shots to mimic a full platoon. Echoes bounced off the cliffs, turning 6 rifles into 60. Move positions. Rain ordered. Keep them guessing. Ellie shifted to a new perch, sighted in on an officer waving orders, and squeezed the trigger. He fell instantly. The enemy panicked. Flares shot into the sky, illuminating the chaos below. Within minutes, they began retreating toward the tracks, abandoning the camp. When the shooting stopped, the valley burned bright as daylight. Ellie lowered her rifle, chest heaving. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the realization that it had worked. They'd broken an entire company's morale with illusion and fire. Rain laughed, disbelief in his voice. Ghost of the Valley strikes again. But Ellie didn't smile. They'll come back, stronger. He nodded. Then we'll be ready. The victory spread like wildfire. Newspapers back home ran headlines. Medic turned sniper repels enemy offensive with 1 rifle. Photos circulated of her standing beside the ruined depot. Rifle in hand, eyes shadowed but fierce. The army made her a symbol, a story of grit and courage to lift morale. Posters bore her likeness. Fight like the ghost, stand for the fallen. Ellie hated every one of them. To her, those weren't victories. They were reminders of what war demanded. For every life she saved, another was taken. For every medal pinned to her chest, another scar formed in her mind. She began to withdraw. Nights grew longer. She stopped joining the others for meals, preferring the quiet company of her rifle and her thoughts. The men noticed, but they didn't press. Everyone carried ghosts of their own. One cold evening, she wandered to the river that ran past their camp. The moonlight turned the water silver. She knelt at the bank, dipping her hands into the freezing current, watching the ripples distort her reflection. Doesn't feel like me anymore, she whispered. Behind her, a voice said, That's because it isn't. It was Sergeant Mills. She turned, startled. You're supposed to be miles north. Transferred again, he said with a weary smile. Scene's command likes moving people who survive. He joined her by the river, silent for a moment. Then, they're saying your name in every camp between here and the coast. I didn't ask for that. I know. But maybe people need it. Hope's hard to come by these days. She stared into the water. Hope shouldn't come from killing. He sighed. No, but it does come from fighting back. For a long time, neither spoke. The river kept whispering over the stones, the sound soft and endless. Finally, Mills said, They're sending you east again, aren't they? Ellie nodded. Command wants me to lead reconnaissance near the Iron Hills. Enemies building something big there. Mills looked at her rifle, resting against her shoulder. That old thing won't last forever. She smiled faintly. Neither will I. He reached out, squeezing her shoulder. Just make sure one of you does. When dawn broke, Ellie stood at the edge of camp, watching the horizon glow red. Behind her, soldiers packed beer, ready to move. The frost sparkled on their helmets like tiny stars. Captain Rain approached one last time. "You ready, Ghost?" She slung her rifle over her shoulder. "As I'll ever be?" He grinned. "You know they say the enemy's been sending whole patrols just to hunt you down. Then they'll have to look fast." As she walked into the mist with her team, her figure blurred against the rising sun. A silhouette half human, half legend. The wind carried her name through the trees, whispered in awe and fear alike. Ellie Ward, the ghost of the valley. A medic, a sniper, a survivor, and the war's most unlikely hero, forged not from steel, but from sorrow, courage, and a rifle that refused to die. The Iron Hills weren't made of iron, but they might as well have been. Cold, hard, and jagged, they stretched across the horizon like the spine of a sleeping beast. Snow clung to the upper ridges, and the air was thin enough to sting the lungs. It was here that Ellie Ward's next mission began, and where, for the first time, she wondered if she would survive. The orders had come at dawn. The enemy had established a fortified position deep in the Iron Hills, a weapons depot feeding their entire eastern advance. Aerial strikes couldn't reach it, too well camouflaged beneath rock and snow. The job required stealth, precision, a ghost's touch. So they called for Ellie Ward. She traveled light. Her rifle, a small medical kit, a canteen, and a photograph of her unit folded inside her coat. Captain Rain led the small squad, 6 soldiers again, each chosen for endurance and silence. They moved at night, cloaked in white gear, vanishing into the blizzard like shadows swallowed by fog. The climb was brutal. Ice tore at their gloves, wind howled through the passes, and every step brought the sound of distant gunfire echoing off the mountains. Ellie felt the sting of frostbite on her cheeks, but she pressed on, her breath turning to steam. "Think the stories are true?" whispered Lang, trudging beside her. "They say there's a sniper up here, one that never misses." Ellie's reply was quiet, almost lost to the wind. "Every sniper misses. The good ones just make sure it doesn't matter." Rain glanced back at her. "We're close. 2 clicks east. Spotters say the depot's hidden under a natural overhang. We hit it fast and pull back before they know we're there." "Simple," Lang muttered. "That's what they said in the valley, too." They reached the ridge at dawn. Below, half buried in snow, the enemy depot sprawled across the valley floor. Fuel drums, tents, and trucks lined neatly between rock walls. Dozens of soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their breath-forming clouds in the freezing air. Ellie settled into position behind a snowbank. Through her scope, she watched their movements, the rhythm of the guards, the rotations of the sentries, the way the smoke from the chimneys drifted east with the wind. She'd learned to read a battlefield like a living thing, every twitch, every heartbeat. "Targets marked," Rain said. "Ward, take out their lookouts when I give the signal. We'll move in on your mark." She nodded, finger resting lightly on the trigger. For 10 long minutes, she waited. The cold seeped through her gloves. Then, a flare of movement caught her eye on the opposite ridge. Her gut twisted. Someone was watching them. Through the cracked scope, she spotted the glint of glass, a rifle scope aimed directly at their position. "Sniper," she hissed. "East Ridge." The warning came seconds before the shot. The bullet sliced through the snow beside Lang's head, throwing up a spray of white powder. He ducked, swearing. "Down!" Rain barked. They scattered behind boulders. The next shot hit Rain's radio, shattering it to pieces. Static hissed and died. "Damn it, we're blind," he shouted. Ellie pressed her face into the scope, scanning the opposite ridge. There a faint silhouette among the rocks, wrapped in white camo. The enemy sniper had the higher ground, better cover, and a clean line of sight. This wasn't a random guard. This was deliberate. A trap. "He's good," Ellie murmured. "Can you get him?" Rain called. She didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow breath, adjusted the rusted rifle, and sighted in. Her heartbeat slowed, syncing with the rhythm of the wind. One breath out, one squeeze, crack. The bullet missed by an inch. The enemy's return shot came instantly, slamming into the rock beside her head. Chips of stone sliced her cheek. Ellie blinked blood from her eyes. "He's matching my timing," she said, realization dawning. "He knows my rhythm." "Then change it," Rain said through clenched teeth. She closed her eyes, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. When she opened them, the world shrank again. Just the rifle, the scope, the glint of the enemy's barrel. She shifted her position by a few degrees, exhaled halfway, and fired. Crack! The enemy shot almost simultaneously. 2 bullets passed each other mid-air, twin streaks of death that screamed across the wind. Ellie's shoulder jolted from the recoil. For a second, she saw nothing through the scope. Then, a figure slumped forward on the opposite ridge. Silence. Rain's voice broke through the ringing in her ears. "You got him?" She exhaled shakily. "Yeah, I think so." Lang let out a low whistle. "Remind me never to play cards with you, Ward." But Ellie didn't smile. Something about it felt wrong. Too easy. She scanned the ridge again. The fallen body was gone. Her stomach dropped. "He's not dead. He moved." "Then we move faster," Rain said. "Let's finish the job." They descended the slope toward the depot, careful and quiet. Snow muffled their steps, but the storm was thickening, a white curtain that made sight lines impossible. Ellie's nerves screamed with every gust of wind. At the edge of the camp, they split up. Rain and Lang planted explosives along the fuel lines, while Ellie provided cover from a high perch overlooking the valley. The rifle felt heavier than ever. Each breath crystallized in the air before her. Minutes passed. Then, movement, a flash of white through the storm. The enemy sniper was back, moving low, hunting. Ellie swore under her breath and ducked behind a rock. Through the scope, she saw him, taller than she expected, calm, methodical, scanning the snow the way she did. Their eyes met through the glass. She froze. He smiled. Then he fired. The shot grazed her sleeve, spinning her sideways. Pain flared through her arm, but she didn't drop the rifle. She rolled, came up on one knee, and fired back. Snow exploded around him. Missed. He was faster, sharper, a reflection of herself. Rain's voice crackled faintly over the damaged radio. "Ward, what's your status?" She pressed the button, whispering, "Busy." He laughed, unaware of the duel unfolding yards away. 10 seconds till we blow this place. 10 seconds. That was all she needed. The sniper moved again, vanishing behind a snowdrift. Ellie tracked the trail of disturbed powder, predicting where he'd surface. Her pulse slowed. Time stretched thin. 8 seconds. A shadow appeared. 7. He raised his rifle. 6. She inhaled. 5. She fired. 4. Silence. Snow drifted down softly between them. The enemy sniper lay still this time, his rifle half buried in the ice. Ellie approached slowly, rifle ready. When she reached him, she saw his face. Young, maybe 19, blue eyes wide open to the sky. Barely older than a boy. Her breath caught. She knelt beside him, brushing snow from his coat. Inside the pocket was a folded photo, a woman and a child smiling beside a farmhouse. Her hand trembled. The photo was almost identical to the one she carried in her own jacket. Behind her, the ground shook. A thunderous boom split the mountain as the depot exploded. Fire roared up the valley, sending a shockwave of heat through the blizzard. Ellie fell to her knees, covering her head. When the smoke cleared, the entire enemy position was gone, just twisted metal and fire against the snow. Rain's voice came through the radio, ragged but triumphant. "Ward, you alive?" She looked down at the boy, then at the flame-lit valley beyond. "Alive," she whispered. "For now. Then let's move before they send more." Ellie rose, her breath fogging the air. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and took one last look at the fallen sniper. The wind buried him quickly, snow swallowing the outline until he was part of the mountain again. "Rest easy," she murmured. Then she turned and followed her squad into the storm, leaving behind fire, ghosts, and a battlefield that would remember her long after the snow melted. Winter came early that year, hard and merciless. The iron hills disappeared beneath a blanket of white that swallowed sound and hope alike. The war was nearing its end. At least, that's what the papers said. But for those still fighting in the mountains, there was no such thing as almost over. There was only survive today. Ellie Ward had survived too many todays. The Iron Hills mission had left its mark on her body and mind. Her left arm still ached where the enemy sniper's bullet had grazed her, and her sleep was broken by flashes of snow, fire, and the boy's open eyes. Each night, she cleaned the same rusted rifle by lantern light, her fingers tracing the scar along its barrel. It had begun to corrode again in the cold, and somehow that felt right. Captain Rain's squad had dwindled to 4. Supplies were thin, morale thinner. Yet command kept sending them farther north, chasing rumors of an enemy retreat that never seemed to end. The ghost of the valley still led them, though Ellie no longer recognized that name. The woman beneath the legend was weary, her soul cracked like the frozen ground she walked on. They camped that night inside the ruins of an old farmhouse. The wind howled through the gaps in the roof, whistling like distant screams. Lang sat near the hearth, trying to coax flame from damp firewood. "Can't believe it's almost Christmas," he muttered. "Wonder if my ma even knows I'm still breathing." "She probably thinks you're home by now," Rain said. "Everyone does. The papers make it sound like we've won." Ellie looked up from her rifle. "Wars don't end when newspapers say so. They end when people stop dying." The words hung heavy in the room. No one replied. Later, when the fire finally caught, Rain handed her a tin mug of coffee. "You should rest," he said softly. "I can't. Nightmates?" "Memories." She stared into the flames. "They don't leave." He hesitated, then said, "After this campaign, you could go home, Ellie? You've done enough for 10 soldiers." She gave a bitter smile. "Home doesn't feel real anymore." Rain wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just sat beside her in silence, listening to the wind batter the farmhouse walls until dawn. 2 days later, they received new orders. Reconnaissance had spotted enemy forces regrouping in the lowlands beyond the river, their last major stronghold. Command wanted confirmation. It was suicide, but Ellie didn't hesitate. "We'll go." Rain met her eyes. "You sure?" "Someone has to finish it." They moved out under a pale gray sky. Snow fell in soft sheets, covering tracks almost as soon as they were made. For miles, there was nothing but white, hills, trees, silence. It was beautiful in a cruel, indifferent way. When they reached the river, the bridge was gone, blown to splinters by retreating forces. The only crossing left was a narrow stretch of ice farther downstream. "Careful," Ellie warned as they tested the frozen surface. "Move slow." Halfway across, the wind shifted. From somewhere up the slope came the faint crack of a rifle. "Down!" she shouted. Bullets tore into the snow around them. The squad scattered for cover, crawling behind boulders. Rain yelled into his radio, but static was the only answer. They were waiting for us. Lang cried. How'd they know we were coming? Ellie's blood went cold. The enemy had baited them, again. But this time, it wasn't a sniper duel. It was an ambush. She raised her rifle, scanning the ridgeline. Through the storm, shapes moved, half a dozen figures closing in. Too many to fight head-on. Fall back. Rain ordered. Cross the ice, go. Lang sprinted ahead, but his boot slipped. The ice cracked beneath him with a sharp, echoing snap. He fell with a cry as freezing water swallowed him whole. Lang! Ellie dropped to her knees, grabbing for his arm, but the current pulled him under. The river closed over his head. Gone. Rain swore under his breath. We can't stay here. Move. Ellie forced herself up, rage and grief burning through the cold. She turned, fired 3 quick shots, each one finding its mark. The enemy staggered, then fell. For a moment, the silence returned. Only the wind and the groan of shifting ice. Rain touched her shoulder. He knew the risks, Ellie. I know. Her voice broke. But it doesn't make it easier. They crossed what was left of the ice, half running, half crawling. When they reached the far bank, Ellie collapsed to her knees, chest heaving. Snow clung to her lashes, melting into tears. She had lost too many. Friends, brothers, pieces of herself. Each death felt heavier than the last. That night, they took shelter in an abandoned chapel on the hillside. The roof was mostly intact, the stained glass shattered long ago. Candles from a forgotten altar still stood in the corner. Ellie lit one, watching the flame tremble. This place used to mean something, she murmured. Rain leaned against the wall. It still can. To who? To anyone who remembers. She looked at him, eyes hollow but steady. Do you? He didn't answer right away. I remember why we started. That's enough. Ellie touched the candle, letting wax drip over her gloved fingers. I used to believe I could save everyone. Now I just hope I can save someone. Maybe that's the same thing, Rain said quietly. They sat there until the candle burned down to nothing. Morning came bitter and gray. A storm rolled in from the north, heavy with snow. Visibility dropped to a few yards. Rain decided they'd wait it out before pushing toward the enemy line. But Ellie couldn't stay still. Something in her chest wouldn't let her. While the others rested, she climbed the ridge behind the chapel. From the top, she could see miles of white wasteland. The enemy camp lay far below, smoke curling from chimneys like thin black fingers. She raised her rifle and looked through the cracked scope. The glass was fogged, but the view was enough to make her breath catch. Hundreds of soldiers, tanks, trucks. An entire division regrouping. If they made their final stand there, thousands more would die. Ellie lowered the rifle, heart pounding. She knew what she had to do. When she returned to the chapel, Rain saw the look in her eyes. Don't say it. I have to go, she said. If I can mark their artillery for airstrike, we can end this. One run, and it's over. You won't make it back, he said flatly. She smiled faintly. Maybe not, but someone has to finish it. He closed his eyes. You've already done enough. So have they, she whispered. And they're still out there. Rain exhaled, defeated. Then I'm coming with you? She shook her head. No, you lead them home. That's an order. He stared at her, anger and sorrow clashing behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded once. If you don't come back, I'll tell them what you did. Tell them I did what anyone would have done, she said. Tell them the ghost was just a girl with a broken rifle. That night, she slipped into the storm alone. The snow swallowed her footsteps, the wind erasing her trail within moments. The rusty rifle hung across her back, like a piece of history refusing to die. She reached the ridgeline before dawn. Below, the enemy base glowed faintly under lantern light. She crawled to a vantage point, freezing fingers fumbling with the signal flare. All she had to do was mark the target and hold long enough for planes to arrive. The storm howled, drowning her heartbeat. For a moment, she thought she saw movement to her left, just a shadow, nothing more. She aimed instinctively, breath fogging the scope. Nothing, only snow. She fired the flare. It shot upward, blazing red against the white sky. Shouts erupted below. The enemy had seen it. Within seconds, bullets cut through the snow around her. She ducked behind a rock, returning fire, measured, precise. Each shot echoed like thunder across the hills. She kept shooting even as her hands numbed, even as the wind tore the breath from her lungs. In the distance, she heard it, the low roar of engines. Allied bombers closing fast. A tear slipped down her cheek, freezing before it fell. "You're almost there," she whispered. "Come on." The sky lit up with explosions. Fire bloomed across the valley, spreading fast. The ground shook beneath her as the world turned to chaos. Ellie smiled through the smoke. The mission was complete. The end was near. But as the firestorm roared below, she realized she was trapped. The path behind her gone, the snow collapsing under the heat. Still, she didn't move. She stayed with her rifle, the rusted metal glowing faintly in the light of victory and ruin. When the planes vanished and the valley fell silent again, only the wind remained, and a faint trail of footprints leading to a cliff's edge, ending where the snow met the sky. The ghost of the valley was never seen again. The snow had long melted from the iron hills, but the silence remained. Burned-out tanks still rusted in the valleys, half buried in weeds. The war was over, officially. But in the hearts of those who'd fought there, the echoes never stopped. Captain Rain returned home 6 months later, a man who looked twice his age. His hair had grayed at the temples. His eyes, once sharp, seemed to stare through things rather than at them. Reporters swarmed him when he disembarked at the dock. Another, decorated hero of the European front. He said nothing to them. He only carried one thing, a rusted rifle wrapped carefully in canvas. For weeks, Rain avoided the ceremonies and speeches. He stayed at his sister's farm in Missouri, far from the noise. But every night, he unwrapped that rifle, staring at it as if it might somehow speak. Ellie Ward's name wasn't printed in any official report. Command listed her as missing in action. No body recovered. No funeral. They buried her in silence, and for Rain, that silence felt like betrayal. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, his sister found him sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees. "You can't keep torturing yourself," she said gently. "I made her a promise," Rain whispered. "I told her I'd tell them what she did." "Then do it," his sister said. "Tell the truth." So he did. Rain wrote his report in a small notebook, every word etched in raw, painful honesty. He wrote about the girl from Kansas, who wasn't supposed to fight, who carried a rusty rifle and saved dozens of lives. He wrote about the night she stayed behind to mark the enemy line, knowing she wouldn't come back. Then he mailed it, not to the army, not to the newspapers, but to her family. 2 months later, a letter came back from Kansas. It was written in careful, trembling handwriting. "Dear Captain Rain, we always believed our Ellie was brave, but we never knew how much she gave. You gave us the truth. That's all a mother could ask for. If you ever come this way, there's a place for you at our table. The farm still stands. The fields are quiet now. Margaret Ward Rain kept that letter folded in his pocket for the rest of his life. Years later, 1957, the war had become history. Men who'd once faced fire and death were now fathers, shopkeepers, mechanics. The world moved on, as it always does. But legends have a way of surviving where memory fades. In a small Kansas town, children whispered about a ghost who walked the wheat fields at night. A woman in a tattered uniform, carrying a rusted rifle that glowed under the moon. Some said she was looking for someone she couldn't save. Others said she was guarding those who came after. The locals never corrected them. Maybe it was superstition. Maybe something more. One autumn afternoon, a man in his 40s arrived at the Ward family farm. His uniform jacket was faded, his eyes tired but kind. He introduced himself as Thomas Rain, Jr., the captain's son. Margaret Ward, older now, her hair silver, met him on the porch. "I brought something that belongs to your family," he said, unwrapping the old rifle. Margaret's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw it. The metal was corroded, the stock splintered, but it was unmistakable. "She kept this all through the war," Rain said quietly. "My father couldn't bear to give it up until he passed. He wanted it to come home." Margaret took the rifle in her trembling hands, tracing the initials faintly carved into the wood. "E. Wool." "She always said she wasn't strong enough," she whispered. "But she was wrong." Rain smiled softly. "She was the strongest person my father ever knew." They stood there in silence, the wind stirring the golden fields. In the distance, a windmill creaked, the same one Ellie had once helped her father fix as a child. Washington, D.C. minus 1,964 20 years after the war. The Smithsonian opened a new exhibit, Unsung Heroes of the Allied Front. Among the polished rifles, medals, and uniforms sat a glass case with a single rusted weapon. The plaque read, "Rifle of PVT, Eleanor Ward, U.S. Army Medic, Battle of the Argonne, 1944, known for exceptional bravery under fire." Visitors passed by, pausing to read the inscription. Most didn't know her story, but some lingered longer, as if they could feel the weight of something unspoken. One man, a gray-haired veteran in a worn overcoat, stood before it for nearly an hour. "She saved my life," he murmured to the museum guide. "Back in France. She pulled me out of the mud and told me to hold on. I never even knew her name." He wiped his eyes and smiled faintly. "Guess I do now." Decades later, present day in Kansas, time moved gently. The Ward farm still stood, though the barn sagged and the fences leaned. A young woman named Sarah Ward, Ellie's great-niece, ran the place now. She'd grown up hearing bits and pieces of her ancestor's story, the medic who fought, the ghost in the valley. To her, it sounded like myth. Until one summer, she found an old trunk in the attic. Inside were Ellie's letters, yellowed, frayed, smelling faintly of dust and lavender. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, reading by the light of a single bulb. "Mama, sometimes I wonder if I'll ever come home again. But if I don't, I want you to know. I did my best. I wasn't brave every day, but I was steady, like Daddy said. Tell the little ones to be kind, and never to walk away when someone needs them. Your Ellie." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. For the first time, she felt she truly knew the woman behind the legend. A year later, Sarah drove to Washington to see the rifle for herself. The museum was quiet that morning. Tourists drifted past, whispering, snapping photos. When Sarah stopped in front of the glass case, her heart pounded. The plaque hadn't changed. The rifle still bore the same scars, a life's worth of struggle etched into metal. But someone had added a new line beneath the original inscription. "Courage isn't loud. It's steady. Sarah smiled through her tears. She reached out, pressing her hand lightly against the glass. Thank you, she whispered. Outside the museum, the city buzzed. Cars, sirens, voices. But for a brief moment, Sarah imagined she heard something else. The echo of a gunshot rolling across the hills, then silence, then peace. And in that silence, she could almost see her, the young woman in the mud, steady hands gripping a broken rifle, eyes fixed on something beyond fear. Epilogue. The ghost still walks every year. On Veterans Day, someone leaves a small bouquet of wildflowers beneath that display case. No one knows who. The flowers are always wrapped in burlap, tied with a single piece of twine, the kind a farmer might use on a Kansas field. Museum staff tried once to catch the visitor, setting up cameras. But they never found anyone. The flowers just appeared, quietly, steadily, like clockwork. One evening, a night guard swore he saw a faint reflection in the glass, a woman in an old medic's uniform, smiling faintly, the edge of a rifle glinting beside her. He never mentioned it again. But after that night, whenever he walked past the exhibit, he'd pause, straighten his back, and whisper under his breath, "Thank you, Private Ward." Final lines. Ellie Ward never saw herself as a hero. She wasn't the loudest, or the fiercest, or the most decorated. But when the moment came, she didn't run. They handed her a rusty rifle in battle, and she gave them everything she had. The metal rusted. The legend didn't. And somewhere in the quiet heart of Kansas, under the same stars she once looked up at before the war, the wind still moves through the wheat, steady, strong, and unafraid.